Hey, John Gilroy here. This podcast has a focus on federal technology, but one can get tunnel vision. Today, we boldly step outside the Beltway for a fresh perspective on AI. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. You know, I've done hundreds of interviews with federal leaders and federal technology people, and sometimes you get tunnel vision, you don't see what's going on beside you. So I decided to go all the way to the Midwest and drag in a guy from Chicago, kicking and screaming, who just handles commercial AI to give us his perspective, because it's always good to have fresh ideas and new ideas, and maybe you confirm biases, maybe have some surprising ideas from someone who's outside your own regular field. Our guest today is world famous Adam Kowalski. He is the CEO of Proximal. That's PROXIML.ai. And he has a lot of experience with different commercial organizations in applying AI, especially in areas of health. But we're going to start off just general questions, maybe dive into health and try to get some maybe best practices and what he's seen commercial companies do that are challenges and how they've overcome them. And maybe our audience can apply those. So, Adam, it's Chicago and I'm in Washington. So let's talk about it. So when your company usually uses artificial intelligence in the area of healthcare, is that right?
Yeah, many of our applications, our customers are in healthcare.
Good. So here inside the Beltway, everyone's talking about AI. They're trying to apply it to everything. I recently heard an interview with a guy named Captain Jesse Black, and he is with the Naval Research Lab. And bunch of brainiacs. That's what the NR is. Mm-hmm. And so I was in the audience, and someone asked me, said, Captain Black, what are you using AI on? He said, it would be easier for me to list what we're not using AI on. So same thing in the commercial world?
Well, yeah. I mean, part of that speaks to what is it exactly that people mean when they say AI as well? Because really anything could be considered AI where a machine is making some sort of decision. And that could be as simple as a rules engine. So like when you call an automated voice response system, somebody programmed rules that say, if the user does this, then do that. That could be considered AI. Now, where you start to get closer to what people think of as AI here, you see that when you combine the data science, which is analyzing data using algorithms, with kind of the concept of AI, that is where you come up with machine learning. So learning from data to program a machine to make automated decisions. Then a subset of machine learning is kind of this deep learning, or what we're calling generative AI aspect, which is generative AI is yet another subset of deep learning, which is a specific machine learning technique. So in the sense that any real automation of decision-making within an enterprise could be considered AI. Now, if you're asking, is generative AI being deployed to a whole bunch of different things? That is still in the works. I wouldn't say that we have large-scale generative AI systems deployed across many enterprises yet. In fact, there's a lot of situations where enterprises are prohibiting its use for a variety of reasons.
Well, Adam, I'm very sophisticated, and researching this interview, I went to your website. That's what sophisticated people do. And PROXIML.ai. What I noticed was two words that are going to resonate with my audience. These two words are data privacy. I mean, you walk down Washington, D.C., data privacy, you'll get a crowd. So it's really important in the commercial world too, isn't it?
Yeah. So that speaks to what I was just talking about with the generative AI prohibitions that a lot of companies have started with, because they can see that although this type of technology is extremely potentially beneficial, there is certainly a lot of increased risk in losing control of your data and that data leaking out. So on the data privacy side, just to kind of talk a little bit about what we do. So what we help is we help companies deploy the best in class type of advanced analytics, including generative AI, on their data privately, so that there's really no, since their data is not leaving the custody of their network, there's really no opportunity for it to leak into other organizations or through the models. So one of the things that's unique about generative AI is that, unlike other types of analytics where maybe it's a classifier, right? It says cat or not cat, right? There's no real possibility for your pictures of cats to like come back out of that model on the other end when it's used by some other customer. With the generative AI models, it's a new type of risk in terms of data privacy and data security, in the sense that any data that's being used as training material for that model can then come back out when some other customer uses it. So people are rightly understanding the kind of data governance and data security risk that these new models are facing. And they're starting to think about, well, how many of the other service providers that I'm using have aspirations of creating a generative AI model on the data that I've already provided them? And that's starting to get people a little bit nervous about, their existing data governance controls, the number of vendors that they have, that they have data sub-processing agreements with, and things like that.
Well, you used the phrase that pays, training. Denzel Washington had a movie about that called Training Day, right? Well, let's talk about training, but not Denzel Washington. Talk about training data. Mm-hmm. For some reason, if I walk down to the 7-Eleven and grab 10 people and said, what do you think about artificial intelligence? They'd say, whoa, flawless. It answers for everything humankind's needs for the next 10 years. So people get kind of dazzled with this AI stuff and don't realize that the foundation really is the data. It's the data. It's the training itself, is the training the data to make those decisions. Right.
So certainly if you use the vanilla ChatGPT, it's very good at, writing poems for you and things of that nature. But when you're talking about business, you want it to be able to answer accurately questions about your business. If you're asking it to generate RFP responses, it needs to know whether or not the things that it's saying are true about your company and your product, right? That's a paramount importance. And the models themselves will not do that out of the box. You have to take that technology and you have to combine it with the type of data that you want to be able to produce and predict in the future. So it has to know about your RFP responses, about your product, about your internal procedures and things like that, if you want it to help you in filling out RFP responses as an example. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into organizing that data so it's either used in the inference process through a technique that's called retrieval augmented generation, or if you are going to further train the model so that it has innate knowledge of your company and its procedures, you have to go through the process of building that data set and then actually fine-tuning that model so it knows about you and your business and doesn't just make it up as it goes along.
Let's talk about mistakes. It would seem to me that there are commercial organizations that may have drawn some conclusions about data that aren't valid and relying on artificial intelligence because it has all the answers. So have you seen that in the commercial world? Any examples you want to share with us?
In terms of mistakes, I think the bigger mistakes are about thinking that you can release this in production directly to your users and our customers more specifically without kind of a human in the loop. It's my opinion that sure, it would be great to replace your entire call center with a ChatGPT backed chatbot. But there was an anecdote of, I think it was Canada Air replaced their online chatbot with some sort of language model based chatbot. And it gave the customer the wrong answer. And there was a lawsuit. They found against Canada Air saying that, no, your chatbot said that he could get a refund, even though that wasn't your policy, right?
I love it. I love it.
So I think, a great thing to get started with is if you want to augment your live chat with a generative answer, by allowing the bot to search your terms and conditions and all those other things and recommend a response to your live agent, that's a great step to take now. That can help you even build your own internal data set of correct answers and or questions and responses, because now what you can do is use a process called reinforcement learning with human feedback, whereby you recommend a response to the live agent. The live agent either accepts it, rejects it completely, or maybe edits it slightly. And no matter what you do, you're capturing both the question and the response and the whole conversation chain, and you can turn that into a training data set that you can then further fine tune that model, which that would enable, first of all, the answers to be better for your live agents. But then maybe eventually, after you build your confidence up about its accuracy, actually do deploy it in a autonomous fashion.
Well, Adam, I love this story about the refund. There's a gentleman here named David Linthicum, written a bunch of books. I love reading his articles. And I get to use a very sophisticated word now when you describe a situation like that. And David introduced me to it. And the word is stupidity. Says, yeah, hey, not the answer to everything. People make mistakes, You pick up a hammer, you sometimes hit your hand. And I like the combination of having one of these silly human beings somewhere, maybe, what should talk about reinforcing the learning.
The AI community has a made-up word that they call it a hallucination. It's not a hallucination. It's just plain wrong. So you don't need to it just made it up. You don't need a fancy word for that.
Well, the classic story I tell my kids is that, Napoleon fought in this American Civil War. Now, what's going on here? Kind of like step back and go, well, there's some problems here. So Adam, my federal listeners are scratching their head going, yeah, it's a fun story. That's really good. So how do you verify the data? How do you do it? How do you make sure you have, valid data?
Well, yeah. So that's a challenge with the entire industry right now. There's actually a whole bunch of different frameworks that are being employed to try to test and evaluate the models. The thing is, it's actually a lot more challenging than the previous. Like when I first got started with this company, computer vision was all the rage, both in just image identification, but also like autonomous driving and things like that. And there's a lot of clearer metrics, I think, for determining, is there a cat in this picture versus was this response like accurate and informative and those types of things. So these kinds of frameworks are still evolving, I think, in terms of how you evaluate it. But a lot of cases, the way it simply works is you have this human involved reinforcement feedback loop where, you continually use it to generate responses, and you have some sort of human evaluator say, this was a good one, this was a bad one. And you keep feeding that back into the model to further improve its responses.
I just want to jump in here and tell the audience that if you're listening to this interview and you want more information on Adam, you can go to federaltechpodcast.com. I'll have his website in the show notes, easy to click on it and get more information. Maybe even set up an appointment with him and say, hey, how do you see this problem and our problem? And maybe there's some way to compare. And because a lot of these insights you talked about, I've heard them from people in agencies, the same kind of concerns they have. And I'll give you a concern, spending money. The federal government spends $90 billion a year on technology products and services. And what you tend to see is a lot of the money is going into maintenance. And then when it comes to data, they're spending it on the shiny tool model, wherever you have it, and not cleaning the data. Do you see that in the commercial world as well?
Yeah. I mean, I see it in the sense that a lot of companies are selling these visions to other businesses about how this AI is just going to revolutionize their business practices and all these other things. And no one is talking about the fact that there's just no getting around the fact that you have to go through the tough work of getting the data in the right, format and integrated and all those types of things, because, just like with anything, these are garbage in, garbage out models. So there are models that can help you with the data cleansing operation itself, but you have to also, monitor them and make sure that they're not hallucinating or being wrong when they're doing that cleaning process. So there's just no getting around the fact that the cleaner your data and the more suited it is for the task, the better the models and the analytics are going to perform. So if your data is messy, it's in bad formats, you're going to get bad results. I mentioned this before, but Andrew Ng has his data-centric AI approach, and what he talks about a lot is a little bit of effort improving the data scrubbing and data management process can yield dramatic improvements in the output in a way that tweaking the model architecture and how complicated that is will not. Like, the models end up leveling out at a certain point simply based on the quality of the data. Like, a simple example that he brings up a lot is they were building a model to do like radiology analytics. So like, they look at a CT scan, they say, does this person have pneumonia? Something like that. Well, they got a model that had like 95% accuracy on this data set that they were using at Stanford Hospital. And so they were like, oh, this is amazing, going to revolutionize radiology. Then they take that same model to the hospital down the street that has a different CT scanner. Maybe it's about 10 years older. The contrast is a little different. The protocol the machine uses is a little bit different. The model just fell apart and could not and was absolutely terrible. So this idea of making sure that you have the breadth of data that you need to cover the real world scenarios that model will encounter, and having the data tagged and annotated and all those types of things in a consistent manner that will allow the model to perform in the real world is much more important than, making the model, 10% better.
Adam, I'm thinking of your skill set. And before the interview, you were like, well, I can't go into detail about NIST specifications and the DO. And I said, no, Adam, that's not what we want. We want an outsider sharing problems that he's seen, because many of my listeners have those identical same problems. And I think what's going on in the government is the larger institutions, let's say the DOD, is in fact, the DOD is starting a community of interest for artificial intelligence. In fact, they have a call for presentations. And I would suggest you jump in there, because you're going to see things that no one else is going to see, because everyone's here is wrapped up with, security and, presidential executive orders and this, and they don't realize that the back door is open. And so someone like you can look and say, well, geez, we've been doing this for 5 years. You forgot all about this because you're so worried about something else. And so I think it's really important to get this a public-private partnership going. We're bringing in new ideas and new thoughts, and it's so good. And before the show, you said, well, geez, John, I worked a lot in the healthcare. I said, well, we have something called the VA. We have something called 138 hospitals. You probably have some interest in some of your thoughts. Well, tell us about some examples of maybe your healthcare experience and maybe how you've used some of this artificial intelligence to help them.
Yeah. So, one thing I wanted to mention related to health. So my background was in healthcare analytics. I ran product management for a company that helped hospitals figure out how much procedures costs and things like that using machine learning techniques. And one of the things that you deal with a lot on the provider side is HIPAA regulated data, right? So patient information, and what worries me about some of these generative AI models is it's really creating a new risk in terms of sharing that data in certain circumstances. So with HIPAA, there's a way that you can de-identify data to make it qualify for what's called safe harbor. So you remove obvious things like location, and patient name, right? And then that enables you to share your data with others or sell it or whatever that may be without being subject to HIPAA. Now, what worries me is that as the analytics are getting so much better, well, I should say one of the pieces in HIPAA is there are certain procedures that must be excluded from a dump like this. And I'll tell you, one of them is One of them is face transplant. Why is that excluded? Because only one of those happens a year, right? And it makes front page news in the New York Times. Yeah. So the point of that is if these extremely rare procedures, it's trivial to re-identify the data, right? Now, what worries me is when you have this safe harbor data, you say, oh, I de-identified. Don't worry. It's anonymized, it's de-identified, so I can send it to whoever I want. Well, what happens when the AI systems are getting better and better to the point that they can re-identify that de-identified information, right? Think about encryption, right? You don't just care if data can be decrypted today. You care about forward secrecy, right? You care about what's going to happen 10 years from now when the computers are that much better and the algorithms are that much better. You know, people are worried about quantum computing, things like that. Will it be decryptable in 10 years, right? When you have secrets that you want to keep for 50 years, like many federal agencies may, you want to make sure that if that data gets captured today, that it's not going to be re-identifiable, that it's not going to be decryptable in the future. And so that's what really starts worrying me on the healthcare side is all these different people you may be saying, I can send them the data because it's anonymous. I'm not sure it will be as these systems get better.
It's interesting that AI may have helped you collect the data and AI can help unlock it. So it's in the cybersecurity world, what they're doing is they're worrying about AI attacks. And so they're defending it with AI. There's a whole AI versus AI, which is just what you alluded to. Well, Adam, I want to go for the hospital room up to 40,000 feet. So we've got this little thing called ChatGPT. And I teach, and all my students use it, and everyone's coming up with silly things and articles and all that kind of junk. From my perspective, I think it's just like a statistical representation of what you can just vacuum in from the web. Okay, so it vacuums and stuff, and Adam gets a silly poem. Okay, whoever. What about copyright? I mean, I have copyrights. I have 523 of them. And so how do you prevent, our overlords from vacuuming up that data and, having copyright violations? I mean, what happens then?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tough one. I mean, there's already lawsuits you see from New York Times and others. But then on the other hand, you've got OpenAI and Google saying that they'll back you. They essentially are indemnifying their customers so that if there is ever some sort of copyright leak, they're going to pay the price for it. I think we're kind of in uncharted territory. And the reason I think that is because nobody ever claims a copyright violation if you read their article and then repeat your interpretation of what they said in that article, right?
Well, that's very carefully phrased. Very carefully phrased, Adam.
Right. Your interpretation, not verbatim, right? So it's kind of not clear on a copyright if it's if it's considered fair use or whatever, or if it's being violated. So again, I'm not a lawyer, and I think that this will be battled out in courts. But I think the thing that I take away from that is if you don't want them to repeat what you're saying, you have to prevent them from getting that data, right? You can't paste it into the ChatGPT window because then it becomes part of their model, because then it comes back out to all the other users that are using ChatGPT. If something's publicly available on the website, people have been scraping websites for a long time. This is kind of a new way to monetize the scraping that they did. So it's hard to say which way that'll end up, but there's a lot of cases in progress on that.
Kind of touching on your earlier theme of data privacy and who controls what. Well, let's get a crystal ball. Take you go down to the Chicago River there and get your crystal ball out and look down 5-10 years. So where do you see this whole idea evolving? Is it going to wind up in just lawsuit after lawsuit? Are just the software developers going to use it for checking code? Is it going to be AI versus AI for attacking systems? So give me a 5-year projection here, Adam.
Yeah, well, this industry is moving so quick, it's actually pretty difficult to make that kind of long-term prediction. But I mean, I do see that a lot of this technology is going to make its way into ordinary business processes. Right now it feels kind of like the late 90s and the internet, and where everybody's like, I need to get on the web. But nobody ever really knew what that meant, right? Like, oh, well, I'll make a website that has my location on it and my phone number. And that's me on the web. And it wasn't really until people started figuring out, oh, I can accept payments over the web. I can sign up new customers. I can generate revenue, all these types of, like, people had to evolve in the way that they're using these things. And that is in progress right now. So I do see, kind of AI systems being a lot more ubiquitous in normal business processes. Anywhere that there's a lot of manual labor involved in text processing, which is a lot. There's a lot of that. I mean, no matter where you work, a lot of that can be simplified. I'm looking forward to the robots. I don't mean that from a I'm worried about them taking over or whatever, but like, I'll really feel that AI is getting useful when I can have a robot shovel my sidewalk for me in the winter. Because I'll tell you, in Chicago, that is a big burden.
The typical Midwest answer, I would say. Sure. That's great. I think a lot of our listeners are getting a different perspective. Now, if you want to get a perspective from Adam, you can go to his website and maybe schedule an appointment or get maybe you've heard the same thing from the last 10 consultants. You need someone from out of town to tell you that, hey, they're full of cabbage or something. So you can go to his website, proximl.ai. With that, we're going to have to end. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Adam Kowalski, CEO of Proximal. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.